because I really do believe that regenerative, how am I actually adding to and improving the lives of the people who work for me and making them better humans, more well, more empowered, more enlightened, stronger and better in their career and their skill development than when they started working for me? What if every company had that approach? And that's my mission, to start regenerative workplaces. I have a big audacious goal or dream of someday making it a certification companies can get, that they're a certified regenerative company for humans.
Hey there, Roger here. A quick request. If you enjoy this episode, please tell one other person. That would be super helpful. Okay, on with the episode. Hi, I'm Roger Kastner, and welcome to the What Do You Know to Be True podcast. In these conversations, I talk with ordinary people about their extraordinary skill, their superhero power, and the meaningful impact it has on others. I'm interested in what inspired our guests to develop their talent, how they think about their superhero power, and the impact it has on others. The intention is to learn more about their experience with their superhero power, and in doing so, maybe we can learn something about the special talent in each of us that makes us unique. This conversation is with Rebecca Hawkins and her superhero power of creating and holding space for others. This episode is deep and rich. Rebecca talks about the importance of human connection and why the lack of connection, which is at epidemic levels, is a critical need now more than ever. Rebecca shares the steps she takes with leaders and organizations to help them through psychological safety, finding purpose in the work, and creating authentic connections to increase well-being, achieve business results, and to become a talent magnet. And she is able to do this through creating and holding space for others. Rebecca also shares why this work is deeply personal to her and for her. Her authenticity and vulnerability are evident in the conversation, and she demonstrates why this is a true superhero power for her. Like I said, it's a deep and rich conversation. If you're ready, let's dig in. Hi, Rebecca. It's nice to see you again. Thank you for joining.
Oh, Roger, it's an honor to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. So we just recently met. However, when we did, there was an obvious spark of connection when we shared the work we do and the purpose behind it. There's a shared passion for helping people realize their full potential. And when you talk about the work that you do and how you hold people you work with in such high regard, it's clear that you're motivated by a bigger purpose. And I like to think the same about myself. So could you tell us a little bit about Rebecca Hawkins and what you do professionally?
Sure. Well, I'm in a transition right now of starting my own consulting business, which is called Regenerative Workplaces. And that was born, just like you said, from a career of elevating employee experience in the corporate environment. I just left a Fortune 100 company where I worked for 13 years. And during my time at that company, the experience of the employee was always central to everything that I did. I had several different roles, everything from frontline operations and people leadership to internal communications and executive support to staff and strategy for call center sales and to HR. I moved around quite a bit and always keeping the employee at the heart of everything that I did. So when I had an opportunity to step out on my own, I really wanted to step into this space of helping other companies do the same thing. How do you create environments where people thrive?
I think your purpose, my purpose, very similar, of not only helping organizations achieve their business results, but also help create workplaces where people can thrive. And that those two things do not have to be in competition. They could actually be done together. It sounds like the experience you had at your last company was a source of inspiration, but was there something, another event or an individual who inspired you to help create and hold space for others?
The best way to say it is that life has helped create this passion for holding space for others and creating space for others. My life's been messy. Can you relate? In fact, there's a Facebook meme that really spoke to me about 7 years ago. It just said, "My life can be summed up in one sentence. It didn't turn out the way it was supposed to." And I remember when I first actually saw that meme, I was like, oh my gosh, you can say that again. And yet there was a component of the meme that ended and said, "And that's okay." And in the moment at that time, I didn't feel like it was okay. I was actually harboring still a good level of resentment and regret about some of the things in my life that didn't turn out the way they were supposed to, until I had a really, really good therapist ask me a question once. And she said, "Well, whose script are you comparing your life to?" And then I had to really sit and think about that, because if I was being honest, I think my script was some combination of fairy tales and happily ever after with what you see on social media of everybody's perfect life. And that was a wake-up call for me. And it started a transformation where I grew into a space of accepting and allowing and embracing that my life actually is exactly how it's supposed to be. And all the messy, 2 divorces, a miscarriage, years of infertility, adoption that turned into really a very difficult parenting journey for me. Those things were not maybe written to the script of the fairy tale, but they made me who I am today. And they made me a person of deep compassion for other people's supposed to pressure, and just the pressure there is in this world to live up to some mythical expectation, and to live up to expectations in general. So we'll get into here, I know in a little bit, some of the nitty gritty of what it means for me to create a workplace where employees thrive. I'm breaking the mold a little bit, because there is a whole science and skill set around organizational effectiveness, organizational development. Those are things that I know you practice. And there's incredible power in those things, creating efficiencies and building better organizations from a structural perspective. But I'm really looking at creating human-centered workplaces that are made for humans, and humans are messy. So they're not going to fit into your 3-part system for organizational development. So I'm kind of a unique consultant in that way, that I recognize when I go into an organization, I'm building my subject matter expertise in humans. What makes humans tick? What makes humans thrive? What makes humans shut down and pull away? And you're an expert in your organization. You're an expert in your people. You're an expert in yourself. And together, we will understand where there are pain points in your organization that we can fix to make it more human-centered.
Thank you for sharing what I guess we could call the messiness of your life and your process to becoming okay. The question around, what inspired you was a little bit of that combination of your therapist, of that social media meme, and also the work that you did. There's something about, your superhero power of creating and holding space for others. You had to do that for yourself to be able to get to where you're at.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, it's interesting that your podcast, kind of likes to focus on people's superpowers. And it's very clear when I look at my life, this was not always my superpower. I come from a long history of perfectionism and people pleasing and a lot of trauma, and trying constantly to find my worth and my value through external sources and looking around me to measure my worth. And it was only when I came sort of to the end of that, and like I said, this meme and my own struggles and a place in my life when I wasn't really happy with how my life had turned out, I had to look at all that and hold space for myself and look inward to find my own inherent worth and my own inherent value, that I began to develop this superpower for others. Yes. So it was absolutely a process of both. Along my journey, my career journey, I became a certified yoga instructor in 2019 after practicing yoga for 11 years and finding tremendous benefits for myself on the mat. And when I started out in yoga, one of my mission, I say, in my yoga practice, is to create sacred space for people to embrace their story and find rest. Because the word yoga means yoked in Sanskrit. Essentially, it means unity. And the whole process of yoga is about integrating mind, body, spirit. And it's a practice. It's just a practice. It's one of many, but it's really reflective of my mission. And I try to often, even in a yoga classroom, encourage people to take yoga off the mat, because it's really more about the practice of integration, of finding true self, whole self, that you can do every day, in every moment of every day, that I've learned to do, that has helped me to survive my own trauma. And I want to share that with the world. And particularly now in this season, I want to share it with workplaces. And it's not about yoga in the workplace, but it's about creating space.
I wouldn't rule out any methodology as far as, helping people in the workplace, finding unity, finding themselves, recognizing the creativity, resourcefulness, and wholeness that everyone has inherent in them. It's just helping them find that and coming up with a process of doing that. So that's.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm all about doing yoga in the workplace. I think it's a great benefit. The platform I preach from, though, says don't have a toxic work culture that burns your people out and then tack on yoga as your solution. That's the platform let's talk about the culture that you have first.
You were sharing some kind words about the podcasts and the search for better understanding of superhero powers. And you were sharing with me before we turned on the record button here, a little bit about the work that you're familiar with and helping people find their superhero power. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there's so much to this. Another thing that I have become passionate about over the last decade is the Gallup Strength Finders model. And I don't know how many people out there are familiar with the Gallup model of finding your strengths, but over many, many years, decades, Gallup has really perfected the science of helping people understand their superpowers through their talents. The Gallup assessment is different from other assessments that tend to look at other dimensions: personality, conflict mode, how you solve problems, perhaps. Gallup really looks at the DNA of how you're wired and how you're made. So they have uncovered over their research 33 different what they call talent themes, things that can be natural talents, and through the assessment identify your top 5. And they distinguish between talents and strengths. It's very important because a talent is something that you are naturally good at, but it only becomes a strength when you use it. What's unique about the study is there are literally 1 in a 33 million chance that you and another person have the same top 5. The assessment delivers a very unique blueprint of who you are. So knowing who we really are and how we're really wired and what our natural talents are, and then aligning where we put our effort into those talents is incredibly empowering, incredibly fulfilling. And it is what helps us to feel known and seen and valued.
I think the distinction you're calling out between the talent, the something you're good at, versus the thing that you're passionate about, that's when you become a strength. And I know early in my career, I think I was consuming all things that Marcus Buckingham would pull out, who also comes out of that same Gallup school of thought, where he will talk about, there's things that we're good at, but if they don't drive, if we're not passionate about it, we will, that's a quick road to burnout. And the things that we're good at, other people see and will ask us to keep doing those things. Whereas the things we're passionate about, no one knows except for us and those we tell. So I think there is something about not only figuring out those things that we're actually good at and passionate about, and then taking that extra step about letting people know, and being able to say no or figure out how to delegate those things that we're good at, but they actually are a tax to us. They weigh us down rather than feed our passion.
Yeah, for sure. And the Japanese have a word for that called ikigai. If you've heard of ikigai, there's a diagram that shows 4 dimensions. So what you are good at, your skills, what you're passionate about, what you love, what you can make money at, right? Because you have to monetize sometimes these things. And the fourth dimension is, what does the world need? And so when you can find that intersection, you really find your ikigai, which is your calling. It's why you are here on the earth. And it is that perfect intersection of strength, passion, and vocation, and giving back to the world.
I love that. And I'm thinking about the position that people might find themselves in, where, something they're good at, something they love, something that they get paid for, but it doesn't do the world good, or something the world doesn't need. And, I think inherently our sense of purpose is tied to, or validated, when it's in service of other people. I think
Absolutely.
when we have a purpose that's only self-driven, I think that's where people might find themselves down the road of that vocation, or that career, where it feels maybe a little hollow, and you have that existential crisis, and then career switch. Do you see that to be true?
Well, yeah. And I would say there's certainly a level of privilege. And when we're having these conversations, and I know people struggle with this idea of purpose and calling and why am I here? Because not everybody has the luxury to find that sweet spot. Some people really literally just need to work to survive and to take care of themselves and their family. And it's really just about opening up the aperture to recognize the potential for more. And then that's why I say it's important to create space for people to explore these other options. And as a common humanity, we're all in this together. Let's hold that space and have these conversations with each other, with one another, and in the workplace. And you really bring up an important point about this distinction between self-focused and other-focused. And I apply that to the workplace. And so when I also talk about the work that I do, I like to say that I am part of a tidal wave that's happening. So there's a divergence happening right now across the corporate landscape, where the primary model for corporate structure, corporate purpose, how companies are run, has been, it's all about the bottom line. That still is necessary. Obviously, if we're not making money as companies, we're going to go out of business. But for the last 100 years, that model has driven a mindset where humans truly are just seen as a resource, literally a human resource, and they are treated as a transaction. We pay you, we give you benefits and salary, and you work for us so that we can make money. And that's the deal. It's based on mid-20th century corporate mindsets like Jack Welch, about efficiency and cutting the bottom and get rid of losers or whatever. It's not based on how humans actually function. And it's not really based on making the world a better place. And that is shifting. The landscape is shifting. More and more companies are rising up to see a greater purpose, that they exist for more than just the bottom line. They exist to make the world a better place. And that companies do that by producing great products that the world needs and doing that sustainably so that the world can thrive as a world, as a planet, and then also by investing in their humans. Because when the humans at the company thrive, the company then also will thrive, and then the world will thrive. I mean, the COVID pandemic launched us into a mental health crisis like none we've ever seen. And I would argue we were already there teetering on the brink, but the COVID pandemic really pushed that, accelerated that, elevated burnout, elevated stress, and diminished mental health, diminished well-being globally. And humans can't operate in this outdated, centuries-old mindset anymore. We need better. We need more to thrive. Well-being in the workplace is not just a benefit that we can afford to add on without addressing the environment first that people are coming into work every day. So think about your company and your well-being as a strategy to address this chronic state. All your employees are coming to work every day with this heaviness already in them and on them. They're coming to work already afraid, already stressed. And if companies are not intentional about creating a new environment for employees to come to work, we're going to lose their employees. We're going to lose the companies. So I'm helping. I'm certainly not the only voice. There's a lot of companies doing great work out there and a lot of other thought leaders in this space, but I'm just joining that tidal wave, putting all of my energy into helping companies build a triple bottom line is sort of the word that I see being used more and more, of profit, people, and planet. So how do we help companies do all three? By helping people do all three. You queued up though for me how I came up with the name Regenerative for my business.
Yeah.
Because what you described are the three different approaches to resource management. And these terms have been used also for decades when referring to how we navigate, how we manage our water sources, how we manage our forests, how we manage our fields and our agriculture. So the initial model is depletive. So we just will suck every little bit out of this forest and clear cut this forest until there's no trees left, and then go on to the next forest. We've evolved to, and currently is really the buzzword, is sustainability, right? How do we let this field rest so that next season it can produce a better crop, instead of constantly farming the same field with the same crop and depleting the minerals? We'll try to sustain this so the field will endure and last. But the most powerful model of resource management, though, is regenerative. So it's like, how do I actually improve the soil and the forest and the waterways and make them better off than they were when we started using them? How do I add to this environment? And so those approaches to resource management have been around for a while. Only recently have companies started talking about those as an approach to how we manage humans as a resource. So I first heard these terms from the CEO of Patagonia, who's, of course, world known for their incredible sustainable practices as an organization and their very focused mission on making a better planet. But they also really invest in their humans and have a great culture. And when I first heard it, I just got lit up inside, because I really do believe that regenerative, how am I actually adding to and improving the lives of the people who work for me and making them better humans, more empowered, more enlightened, stronger and better in their career and their skill development than when they started working for me? What if every company had that approach? And that's my mission, to start regenerative workplaces. I have a big audacious goal or dream of someday making it a certification companies can get, that they're a certified regenerative company for humans.
Thank you for sharing that, because I love the idea that there's actually 3 steps in that model, not just 2. Anytime you think there's only an A and a B, there's always a C. There might be a D, there might be an E. So thank you for sharing that, because I love this idea that there's a difference between depletion and sustainability. And sustainability, to the example you gave of the crops, that's just prolonging the depletion, at least it feels like. Whereas, thinking about it in a regenerative, in a giving mindset, I think, will be the direction we need to be in. When you are thinking about creating and holding space for others, is there a framework or a process that you follow?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to answer that question, because there's this power that I've developed that I'm still not perfect at, because I'm human and we're all human, right? But there's this power in creating space for a individual, someone sitting right in front of you in this moment in time. I have simply, as a coach, as a certified coach, leaned into empathy, empathetic listening, and curiosity are the 2 most powerful ways to hold space for people, right? So simply listening and asking questions, really leaning into the truth that every person is an expert in themselves and their story and their experience, and they simply want to be seen and heard and valued. So can we do more empathetic listening and asking questions? And that's the skill of a coach, and anybody can do that. Anybody can hold that space and create that space. So I kind of have leaned into, I say that my superpower is creating safe space. Part of the safe space, and part of the way I do that, is simply my own disarming vulnerability and authenticity, not trying to perform and live up to other expectations myself, being humble, self-aware, being emotionally intelligent, acknowledging my own frailty and failures. There's even a whole other study from Harvard researcher by Dr. Jeff Polzer, which is called the vulnerability loop, where it was studied in groups of people. It's a group dynamic that when one person signals their vulnerability, their weakness, their struggle, they need help, even just asking for help is like the first way to do this. It actually automatically sends this signal to everybody in the room that it's safe to be vulnerable. What's really powerful though, when the second person steps in and does the same thing or acknowledges, gosh, I'm really struggling too. I could also use some help. And so bringing your own vulnerability, that's congruence, bringing your own authentic self into the room also helps to create that safety for others. But that's just sort of one-on-one or in group dynamics. I have a whole different approach when I'm looking at an organization or a company, because now we're talking about systems and processes and policies and procedures. And so I have a little different approach, and that's an acronym that I literally have called SPACE, creating space for humans at work. So the SPACE acronym really is just S, P, and C, and then you just add the vowels. And again, these three things are all basic human needs. When we get them met in the workplace becomes a place we thrive. The S stands for safety. So safety is a basic human need because we are wired to be risk averse. We're hardwired to be on constant alert for danger and threat. So I like to say that, the brain is an amazing organ that does millions of complex things every single day. But at its core, the brain has one job, which is to keep us alive. Everything it does revolves around keeping this body alive. And it does a lot of those things outside of our control. It digests our food for us. It pumps our heart for us. And thank God I don't have to remember those things or put them on a list. My brain just does them for me, right?
Except for breathing. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves to take a breath.
Well, breathing is a fascinating one because it's both automatic and controlled. So I can talk about breath for an entire podcast. But
as a yoga instructor,
exactly. But one of the things our brain does for us automatically, without us ever having to think about it, and what we can't control it, is to keep us away from danger. It's this little part of our brain called the amygdala. People talk about this a lot I've heard lots of podcasts and TED Talks about this, so it's not new or revolutionary, but it's a part of our brain whose only job is to keep us safe. It's to scan the environment and find danger. And when it sees danger, emit all these stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol into our body to raise our heart rate, to tense our muscles so we can be ready to run, to get us breathing more shallowly, to conserve oxygen. And unfortunately, it's really just based off of pattern recognition. So it's really helpful when there's actual danger coming our way. Back in the dinosaur days when there is a mountain lion or a saber-toothed tiger about to attack, or in modern days when we're about to get hit by a car, amygdala is very, very helpful. Gets us out of the way quickly. Not so helpful when we're in a room and we have a question we want to ask and we think it's a stupid question. All of a sudden we feel our heart rate go up. Our mouth gets dry. Our face gets flushed. We get butterflies in our stomach. We feel like we want to run and leave the room because we have a question we want to ask. So what is so scary about asking questions? That's the research that I really got excited about. And that goes down a whole rabbit trail around social risk and relational risk. And so we're very actually afraid of rejection, punishment, because the brain can't actually recognize the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. So unfortunately, the brain is wired to avoid threat. When it senses threat, it releases stress hormones. And we can't just override this response. It's completely automatic. And part of what happens when we're in that threat state is the logical thinking part of the brain literally shuts down. We can't make good decisions. We're not thinking clearly. We're not creative or innovative. And unfortunately, those hormones that are shot into our body, the adrenaline, the cortisol, were designed to be burned off and metabolized by running away from the saber-toothed tiger. But we don't burn them off or metabolize them because we're just sitting in a meeting room. So they store up and they store up and they store up, and they cause heart disease and they cause diabetes and they cause cardiovascular illness, and this causes stress. So companies need to start making a deliberate focus on what are the things in the workplace that are putting people into a threat state that are shutting down their creativity and their productivity and increasing their stress. And so I help companies look at those types of things. That's one step.
And so that's the S in space. What's the P?
Tom Rath actually wrote a book recently called Life's Great Question. And in that book, he says there's a growing body of evidence to suggest that the single greatest driver of both achievement and well-being is understanding how your daily efforts enhance the lives of others. So
Hmm.
we were talking about, what does the world need? Because it's actually a critical component of our well-being. We are a pro-social species. Contributing to something greater than ourselves actually enhances our well-being. It releases some of those good hormones in our bodies. It's healing to give back to others. So when we are tied to purpose, to something greater than ourselves, we actually experience greater well-being and greater performance and productivity. So I invite companies to ensure that they have clearly articulated values and a mission, and that those values and that mission is actually embedded in the work that people do, so they can see how their work contributes to the mission of the organization. The C stands for connection, which is another basic human need. And you can see how these are all really woven in together. So another thing we are wired for as humans is to be seen, known, and valued. Here's another great quote. I found it actually on Facebook originally. This is by an author named Jeff Brown. He says, if there's any need that is perpetually unmet, it is the need to feel seen. To feel seen in our humanity, our vulnerability, our beautiful imperfection. When we are held safe in that, a key turns in our hearts, freeing us from isolation and transforming our inner world. So he likes to say that if there's anything we could offer each other, it's the gift of sight. And yet companies, again, are not necessarily built to foster human connection. We're built to get the job done, to get the work done, to deliver on the bottom line. And we skip over all of these powerful and important moments for deep human connection. So I invite companies to really look at their processes, policies, procedures, how they run their meetings, how they do one-on-ones with employees and coach them. So employees feel seen and known for who they really are. So you can pause and build those and foster those moments of human connection. So safety, purpose, and connection are the three pillars of regenerative workplaces.
Well, you mentioned Tom Rath, and I know Tom Rath also comes from the Gallup School,
Yeah,
and
he does.
has several books on finding your strengths and strength finders. Really interesting that someone who's spent their whole career studying strengths finds that the number one thing that people need is is to be seen. It's a precursor or an input to having people be able to really bring their strengths to work or to their community, to their family, and have a really meaningful impact in doing that. You were just talking about safety, and you and I had a conversation. We're both big fans of Brene Brown, and Brene recently on one of her podcasts was talking about the difference between brave spaces and safe spaces, and how she does not feel comfortable using the term safe space anymore. I think you have a little bit of a different take on it. I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on this. So how would you address that idea of a safe space versus a brave space?
I love that. And I loved that podcast. It was transformative for me too in my work, because what had happened for me in my last job was we were trying to roll out some culture initiatives around healthy challenge, for example, and progress over perfection and things that the company needed because they would get stuck in over collaboration, hyper decision making, fear of failure, all these things. And I was like, wait a minute, there's a common thread here of psychological safety is missing. So I became obsessed with Amy Edmondson. I not only read, but listened to her book and digested it. And I'm like, this is it. This is a secret bullet. So huge shout out to Amy Edmondson and her book, The Fearless Organization. I highly recommend that and her work. And that launched me into this whole space of trying to encapsulate those principles of psychological safety in my workplace and teaching leaders she has a leader toolkit in that book with 3 key behaviors that leaders can do to create a more psychologically safe space. And psychological safety is a buzzword too. Google did a whole study on it. Project Aristotle found that was the leading indicator of high-performing teams at Google as well. So it's not a new term. But yeah, there's a lot of, I would say, confusion, even mythology around this word safety. And I agree with Brene. And in fact, as I was teaching psychological safety, I would have people, both leaders and individual contributors, kind of come back and say, well, I'm doing everything I can as a leader to create safety and people are still afraid. And so I would lean into that a little bit. And I realized, well, yeah, that's because our brain has an amygdala. And so it's never going to feel completely safe. We are a risk averse species. Those feelings of fear will always come up. So I started to look more into some of the science around bravery. And I think companies need to teach both. So we absolutely need to destigmatize and remove stressors and threat in the workplace. And we need to help people recognize fear for what it is and have tools to overcome their fear and be brave. So I like to reference Liz Gilbert's book, Big Magic, for this piece, because she talks about putting fear in the back seat. She acknowledges in that book that fear is never going to go away. We can't actually kick it to the curb. It's always going to be on the journey of life with us. We just don't have to let it drive. So we can put fear in the back seat simply by beginning to notice in our body when we feel fear and say, oh, that's fear. It's a skill. It takes practice to recognize fear for what it is. It's simply the body's, the brain's response to a potential threat. And when we recognize we're in that fear state, then take a step back and instead of focusing on the risk, because fear at the end of the day is simply a belief that something bad's about to happen, right? How can we shift our perspective to the potential reward? What could happen if I took this brave step right now? If I spoke up, maybe I'm that person, the first one in the room that everybody's thinking this. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for asking that question. I was thinking the exact same thing. Or maybe you have the idea that changes the process for the better. It never would have happened if you don't speak up. Those are things that cause us fear, but the fear is not always our friend. So she talks about recognizing it as a signal that something great is about to happen. And how do we create more bravery? And so I do talk about both of those things when I go into an organization or a team, or even in my one-on-one coaching. But the reason I still use safety as one of the words in my 3 pillars and how I say we create space is simply because we don't talk about it enough. So I like to say no leader wakes up every morning and says, how can I create more fear at my company today? Let me see. What can I do? Right? No one's doing that unless they're kind of a sociopath. And I don't think there's a lot of those out there. But people are afraid anyway, or stressed anyway, or burnt out anyway, even though that's not your intention. And it is because our processes, our policies, our procedures, the way that we're running the company, the way that the unspoken messages have all these hidden micro stressors in it that are simply not human friendly. So unless we go into the workplace with a deliberate mindset of creating safety, and this also comes right out of Amy Edmondson's work, she says that the only way to create safety is to intentionally, consistently signal safety over and over again so that people can begin to then be brave, because they still are going to have to be brave at the same time. And that's why I think safety is important. So I'm 100% on board with Brene, and I'm 100% on board with Amy Edmondson. And I think that the two approaches work really well together.
This might be a little bit of a curveball, and it's not intended to be a curveball. This morning, I was reading an article about what type and when to use humor in the workplace. It was talking about negative humor that ultimately has a target, whether it's self-directed or other-directed, that negative type of humor has a negative effect in organizations. Whereas if you make fun of or find humor in situations that everyone could find humor in, that's referred to as a positive form of humor and actually creates greater connection. Have you heard about anything like this? Or have you found that to be part of your approach to helping organizations achieve a level of safety, bravery, connection, and even purpose?
It's a really fascinating question, Roger. I'm not familiar with that particular study, and I have to say I don't consider myself a very funny person. So typically humor is not in my toolbox. However, fun absolutely is. And it is a huge humanizing element and force in the workplace. And some of what I did a little bit in my last job, we were a part of the Great Places to Work survey. one of the questions they ask on their survey, their benchmark survey, is my organization a fun place to work? And it's amazing how fun correlates also with trust and with well-being, and with belonging and other elements that make people then great advocates for their workplace, and people who say this is a place I would recommend to my friends. So employee net promoter score, for example, as a benchmark measurement. So yeah, I think fun is an incredible force for well-being and for employee retention and talent attraction. And that's the ROI. Like if we're going to go back to organizational speak, like the ROI of all of this stuff is still, you want to be a company where people are drawn to work for. You want to be a magnet for talent, especially in this current market. And when you have your employees, you want to retain them. Because as the studies show, it costs roughly 2.5 times an annual salary of that employee to replace them if they leave. So you want to be able to retain your talent, attract talent, and you do that by having an incredible work environment where people want to go. And fun is absolutely an element of that. But I would agree with the study that when you don't know what's funny to everybody, everybody has a little different sense of funny. And certainly pointing out somebody's flaws in a public way, even if you think you're doing it good-heartedly, can be not fun for that person, or potentially other people. But you described kind of the Seinfeld-esque humor, of just making fun of the obvious that everybody's thinking, and it is completely depersonalized. But I think that is a great approach.
What is the impact on you when you have created and held space for others?
When I say that my life hasn't turned out the way it was supposed to, it involved a lot of pain. Like I said, some broken marriages, and even right now, broken relationships with one of my children. I wasn't always a great mom. And I can say that without shame because I've done my work to hold space for myself. And I can look back and say, you know what? I was doing the best I could at that time in my life. I was going through a lot of emotional trauma, and I didn't have anything in me to give. So I hurt my kids. And I think it's important for me to say that out loud for myself, and also for all the moms out there listening. Like moms, dads, it's not easy being a parent. And we're just humans bringing our best selves to those situations and not always showing up the way we wanted to. And I say that, I tell that story because now I fast forward and I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I knew the things I knew about humans, about children, about development, about core needs then when my kids were little that I knew now. I can't go back and rewrite history. So I have that. I hold that sadness without shame, but I still hold that sadness. But now I know better. I can do better, right? And that's what Maya Angelou always says, right? That the key is once you know better to do better. So that is how it's had an impact on me, is I'm truly deeply committed to hold better space for my adult children than I did for them when they were little. And they've got to work out their own hurt that's legitimate till they're in a place where they will let me. But I get to do that with other people as well. I have a very rich, deep network of friends, of community, of tribe, of people that I get to hold space for, clients I get to hold space for. It is such an honor. Like I said in my yoga mission, it's sacred. Like I get to hold sacred space for people to be held and seen and known and just to connect with themselves. I do come in with subject matter expertise. I love being an expert. You can tell I love talking about this topic, maybe a little too much, but I really believe that the core to holding space for people is to realize they are the experts in themselves. I don't know their story or their experience. I don't know what's best for them. But if I can hold space with empathy and curiosity, I can help them find that path back to true self. And that is just incredible for me to witness. But it's been incredible for me to forgive myself by holding space for me to have done the best that I could and to find grace and healing in that. And then I think it's had an incredible impact on people who get to experience that too.
Thank you for sharing that. That is Powerful stuff. Your ability to create and hold space is a wonderful gift to be able to give to other people. It's also an incredible gift to yourself, which is lovely. I love how you can talk about these things, that you have sorrow but not shame, because
Yeah.
again, our friend Brene Brown will tell us about such negative, detrimental impacts of shame, but being able to pull those apart. It's really clear that you've done this work for yourself, and you can bring this for others. And hopefully, not only it has that immediate impact of creating the space so other people can work on the things that they want to work on, but hopefully it also has the impact where you're demonstrating how to hold space, and therefore maybe that other person can be a little bit better at holding space for others as well.
Yeah, I really believe that this could be transformative to our world. It's what our world needs most, I think, right now. And the reason I'm focusing on workplace is because we spend so much time there. And it's like the last great frontier. There's certainly great therapists out there. There are great coaches out there. There are communities, tribes, communities of faith, and just communities in general that are getting better at recognizing we can't live in this level of volatility and division and polarization any longer. We have to come together as a world to see one another and to bring more curiosity, empathy, and to have hard conversations with a heart of unconditional positive regard for the person sitting in front of us. But it feels like the workplace is the place we still put up the mask and get the job done. And we spend so much time there. So I'm hoping to help transform workplaces as the next great frontier to really, like I say, transform the world.
What I believe you're describing is that process of regeneration.
Yeah.
What you do is very regenerative, not only in the moment, but then the impact of it.
I hope so.
So what do you know to be true about creating and holding space?
It's what we're all longing for. There's an incredibly powerful image. It's a sculpture called Love. The artist's name is Alexander Malov, and it's from the Burning Man Festival. It's an image of two children reaching out to one another within a framework of two adults who are sitting cross-armed back to back. It represents to me what I call the human condition. These two children desperately longing and reaching out for one another, wanting that connection, wanting to be seen, to be held, but they're trapped inside these adult bodies who are in self-protect mode, who are hurting. We all long to be seen and known and to value one another. I know this to be true. Our brains are wired to that. And yet we're afraid. We live in fear. Our brains are also wired to avoid risk, to avoid pain, to avoid loss and suffering. And we've known no greater suffering in our lifetime than probably that caused by humans. So we both long for and fear human connection. And it is our very act of self-protection that is preventing us from getting the one thing we long for the most. I know this to be true.
Yeah, I love what you called out, that paradox of what we long for and yet what we're wired for. And what you're talking about is this approach to help us sort of hold and manage both of those things at the same time.
Yeah, it takes effort. It does. It takes intentionality, I think is the word that Amy Edmondson used. And it takes awareness. And that's why I'm speaking about it. I don't think people consciously are aware that this is happening. And so bringing awareness to it is the first step. And to your point about not completely getting rid of fear, I completely agree with what Brene Brown says too about vulnerability. It's not about bearing your soul and oversharing every single thing about you all the time to all people everywhere, right? Like that's not what she means by vulnerability, and it's not healthy, and not everybody's safe. There are certainly people who have demonstrated that they maybe are not people you want to share everything about you with. But it's you can check your stories. That's Brene Brown 101. Check your stories and recognize, is this fear I have real or imagined? How likely is this actually going to happen? What am I basing this fear on? And can I then push through it to get to the potential reward on the other side?
What did you believe early on about creating and holding space for others that you've come to learn to not be true?
I think I used to believe that because I desperately needed approval and I needed my validation from outside of myself. And I tried to make myself into somebody that could be liked, or I would try to figure out how, particularly to get that attention that I wanted or needed for validation. And I've learned through really, Brené's research, but also through experience, that I have to belong to myself first, is what she says. That the first place, and this is where you started, I have to create space for myself. So if I'm not true to who I am, I'm not really belonging. I'm not really being seen. It becomes like a drug that I can never get enough of. And so the first step I think I've learned when it comes to creating space is, like you said early on, create space for me first, know who I am, love who I am, honor who I am, and don't compromise who I am in order to fit in order to get connection.
So you talked about the value of having fun.
Mm-hmm.
So let's have a little fun. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Okay, let's try.
So fill in the blank. Creating and holding space is
necessary.
Who in your life creates and holds space for you?
Lots of people. I'm so blessed.
Is there a practice or routine that helps you grow, nurture, or renew your ability to create and hold space?
Yeah, meditation.
What is one thing that gets in your way of creating and holding space for others?
My own fear of rejection. My own fear still of needing approval.
What is a word or a phrase that describes what creating and holding space feels like when it's had a positive impact?
Sacred.
If a listener wants to ask you a question or follow up with you, where do you want to point them to?
I have a website, regenerativeworkplaces.com. On that website are links to schedule a time for a discovery session if you want to talk more about coaching one-on-one or about workplace well-being strategy. Or you could just shoot me an email if you don't want to go to those links. It's just rebecca.hawkins@regenerativeworkplaces.com. You also can find me on LinkedIn. So look for me there, and on TikTok. I'm TikTok as Regenerative Rebecca.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for creating space and sharing here your story, what you know to be true about creating and holding space, and showing up in such a vulnerable, humble, authentic way. It was an honor to be just part of this conversation and to get to know you a little bit more. And I'm really looking forward to the next conversation.
Thanks, Roger. Wishing you all the best with this podcast and the great work that you're doing as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. A big thank you to Rebecca. I'm really grateful to her for sharing her story, her wisdom, and her practice of creating and holding space for others. I love how what Rebecca highlights is that what we're all longing for is authentic human connection. And creating and holding space for others is how we can make and deepen that human connection. I'm still struck by the paradox she highlighted, that we are all wired for fear, and yet we all long to be seen, to be appreciated, and to be connected. We each face the challenge to achieve that connection, and yet we need to manage our fear of being rejected. And the greatest gift we can give each other is the ability to create and hold space so the other person can be seen and feel connected. This conversation leads me to reflect on a few things. Who is creating and holding space for me so I can explore my questions and uncertainties in life? And when I'm jumping in too soon to apply my superhero power, when I could be creating and holding space for others, am I creating less connection between us? If you are not sure what your superhero power is, one of the easiest ways to discover it is to ask a trusted friend or colleague. They know what it is. What Do You Know to Be True is a Three Blue Pens production. I'm your host, Roger Kastner. We are recording on the ancestral lands of the Duwamish and Suquamish people. To discover the ancestral lands of the indigenous people whose land you may be on, go to native-lands.ca. Okay, be well, my friends. So you're good with yoga in the workplace. How about trust falls? Do you find a place for trust falls as well? Don't even. You don't.
Fraught with
I will
peril.
not. Yeah, exactly. I will not require you to respond to that ridiculous statement.
I wish I was funnier. That wasn't my superpower.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, if everyone was funny, then no one would be funny. Right.
Yeah, that's why we love comedians. Yeah, because they can bring us to a place we couldn't get to ourselves.
I did as, leaders being vulnerable and coming in with humility, leaders talking with hopefully more humility than humidity. And